Ah, these lights are bright. From 1954, just after I got back from Korea, to 1989, I was one of two art teachers at City High School in Iowa City. Now, I obviously had an ungodly number of students. Who could remember them all, let alone their assignments? All right, yeah. You do remember the ones who show up on the news. I do remember Celia Merode, but it wasn't for her art. Now, she showed some promise early on. I molded over again when the news kept bringing up that NEA brouhaha. Her drawings were proficient compared to other girls. She was probably the only one of them making B plus or even A minus quality work. Of the girls, yes. Good grief, it's just an observation after decades of teaching. If you're bored enough to look through my grade books, I'll get Judith to go dig them out for you. You'll see a pattern. Anyhow, that's not to say Celia was some sort of Da Vinci. Her paintings and sculptures didn't have much authority, and her skill with foreshortening as a draughtswoman may have been passable, but not as a painter. Typical, really. Still, I think she handed everything in on time, and I could tell whatever she made was whatever it was supposed to be. But junior year began, and something obviously happened over the summer. It's always the summer between sophomore and junior year, even with the boys. With Celia, I don't know, maybe it was a boy, or maybe she started smoking Indian hay. What? The first major assignment of the year for the painting class in every grade that I taught was to paint a self-portrait. I like to see how the kids see themselves, and it was an easy assignment for me to grade. If I didn't see them in the self-portrait, they'd probably receive a C or lower. I asked the students to hand in their paintings at the end of class. After the last student left the room, I went to my desk where they'd stacked up the paintings in a big, messy pile. When I thumbed through the paintings, I was surprised to see a film canister slip out from between them and fall onto the floor. I didn't know where it came from. I stepped into the hallway to see if one of these audio-visual kids left it by mistake. But the halls were crowded in between bells, and I didn't see any of that our students. So I picked up the canister, and I realized it was particularly strange for it to be film. The audio-visual club had already started dropping off VCR tapes whenever I ordered something new to fill class time. Ugh, these lights are bright. The next Monday, I handed back all the paintings with their grades, nothing out of the ordinary. But then this Celia Merode raises her hand, and she says, "I didn't get my self-portrait back." I told her that's probably because you didn't hand in a self-portrait. "But I did," she insisted. I said, "No, Miss Merode, I never received one from you." This was always a little ruse by some of my failing students. She whined, I handed mine in with all the others. I studied her face to see if I really needed to bother searching for this painting. But she said, it was in the film canister. The painting was in the film. The film canister? I was gobsmacked. This is an art class. We're not making movies. And she actually asked, so you didn't watch it? Watch it? I said, of course not. We're a month into the semester. I think you understand that you're in a painting class. She begged me to believe her, saying, it's my painting. It's my self-portrait. I didn't think I'd need to define painting for the junior year painting class. But she said, if we watch it, you'll see. We won't be watching it. I said, for one thing, we don't have the school's projector reserved. And more importantly, I don't know where your little film is. And she squawked, you don't know where it is? I told her that I dropped it off with the audio-visual kids. I assumed it was theirs. So she said, you effing idiot! Well, she used much bluer language, as you can imagine. She jumped out of her chair and yelled, you effing idiot! That's the only copy! Before I could give her a detention, she had run out of the classroom. It was the end of the day on a Friday. I was just about to lock up the AV room. Now, we didn't really have AV classes back then, or video production like we usually call them today, but the equipment was basically for a small but very dedicated group of guys who were really excited about learning how to use it. Back then, I just had this group of senior boys who didn't need to take a first period class, but they still came in every morning for a quote unquote study hall that we used as an unofficial AV class. Even by 81, we were on to VHS. A VCR didn't cost $1,000 anymore. So I was surprised to see that somebody had left a 16mm film canister on a shelf by the door that Friday. We didn't get a whole lot of funding back then, so I knew every piece of equipment, film, and tape we had in there. The canister didn't have any label on it, but Celia Merode. I didn't know if that was a student. I thought it might have been a place, or I'd heard of a professor in town with that name. Maybe it was one of his lectures, but I was hoping it was more interesting than that. After I finally got it spooled onto the projector, I watched it at least a dozen times before going home for the weekend. For Monday morning, I decided to show it to my study hall students. Our room was tiny, an old janitor's closet, really. Today's administrators would never let me use it as a classroom, but we made do. We had 5 chairs facing the screen. The projector was on the other side of the room, probably not even 10 feet from the screen. I turned off the lights and hit the projector switch. The film opened immediately with a portrait shot of a girl. It was shot in black and white. The girl appeared to be wearing either a shawl or something that looked like a monk's cloak. She had a neutral expression on her face, not happy, not sad, but not in between either. She didn't seem content like the Mona Lisa. It was just this blank look, and she kept staring somewhere over our right shoulders. It took me those dozen viewings to see that it actually happened simultaneously. I thought for sure that one must start to happen before the other, but the artist timed it perfectly. While the girl slowly began to smile, slowly, very slowly, her face turned brighter shades of yellow. Just the face. Somebody must have hand-painted the individual film cells like some of the earliest movies from the turn of the century. After a few seconds, she had a very melodramatic smile, showing her teeth, her tongue. It was a huge smile. Then she began again really really slowly, she began to frown, and the color of her face ripened into darker shades of blue. It was a very overwrought frown, and this changed every 10 seconds or so. There was a new emotion and a new color. When I first turned on the projector, I heard a couple students mumble that it was a Celia. After the first viewing, Bill turned to me and he said, "That's Celia Merode. She's a junior here." "She's a student here?" I was even more intrigued. I wanted to know if she'd actually made this thing by herself. It would have taken hours upon hours to hand paint each of those individual frames. And to do it so well. We watched it again. I'd even done some research to give the guys a little impromptu lesson on how early films were colorized. Most films before sound were colorized to some extent. Crews of artists hand-painted each frame with aniline dyes that were just haunting in how they managed to be vibrant and washed out all at the same time. Mostly women did the painting because people believed that their little hands were nimbler for the task. This Celia Merode girl must have been an absolute surgeon to hand paint 16mm film. The women who painted them at the turn of the century were working with 35mm film, so their tiny canvas was twice as big. 16mm is like painting on a canvas as narrow as my thumbnail. We watched Celia become red with anger. Then our door flung open and light poured in and shocked us out of the film. Everyone turned to see who just blinded us. To our surprise, it was the same girl who was then red with rage on the screen. She looked the same in real life. Bill said, "Whoa, this is pretty surreal." Celia gawked at the screen, then she turned to the projector, then back at the screen. She was purple now, but seemed relieved in real life. She said, "Oh, thank God." She was still panting, like she had just run across the entire school. After she caught her breath, she watched the film end and she turned to our class. She had her arms crossed and she glared at us and she asked, "So do you like it or what?" Of course I gave her an F. She didn't do the assignment correctly.